So if you have never done Android stuff before, the place to go is developer.android.com. Go to develop. Let's see, I'm going to click over here. I think it's underneath here. So do the little hamburger menu thing under develop. Go down to Android Studio. Official IDE for Android, blah, blah, blah. Download this guy. So it's 3.01 for Mac. It's 3 point something for Windows. Just get the latest one. Pretty much every time you open it, it's going to want to do some stupid little update. Most of them don't really have that big of an impact, but I would just always update it if you have time. Just leave it running overnight or whatever. But, you know, this is the tool we're using. So the language is going to be Java-based. And then Android Studio lets you build the interfaces. And I'll show you kind of a simple interface today as we get going. But there's plenty of tutorial videos and things like that. As I was mentioning to him before, you know, all of you have had some programming before. If you have never worked with Android Studio, I get it. You know, you'll get up to speed in the first couple of weeks. I'd rather you be stressed now and have fun the rest of the time than kind of hobble along the entire semester or something like that. So watch some videos, things like that, kind of get up to speed, and I'll be generous on my early grading, knowing that you're kind of new to it. Okay? So anyways, once you get Android Studio, you'll go in here, you'll create a new, it'll pop up, create a new Android Studio project. I'm going to name this guy CSC548 Spring 2018. We're going to call this guy Number Converter. All right. Actually, let's call it, well, Number Converter is fine. Yeah, we're going to convert between bases. All right. Leave everything else alone. Doesn't matter where you store it because we're ultimately going to store it up in GitHub. So I'm going to give you a link to GitHub, and then what you'll do is you'll clone it in GitHub. And I'll show you that at the very end. And that way you'll have an account on GitHub. You'll clone it to your account. You'll check it out from your account so you can make changes and push your changes back there because you won't be allowed to push changes to mine. So if you check mine out and make changes, you won't be able to push it back. Instead, you have to clone mine. There's just a button. You hit clone, it clones it to your account. Then you check it out from your account. You can do whatever you want. Push the changes back, and what you'll submit is a link to your GitHub repository for me to do it. Okay? So it doesn't really matter where you store it on your computer because we're ultimately going to store it in the cloud. Hit next. This thing that pops up, the default's usually fine. It lets you choose which API of Android you're developing for. We're not doing anything earth-shattering in here, so the default is fine. This one will run on 100% of the devices. Notice here, if I go all the way down to the latest, greatest version of Android, Oreo, and I click on that, notice it runs on less than 1% of the devices. So, you know, the idea is that the older API you use, the more Android devices it'll run on. For us, we don't care. We just pick go with the default one. What was it, 17 or something?
No.
15? Was it 15? 15. API 15, ice cream sandwich. That's fine. Life will go on. Okay? We're not using any fancy. Think about this like the CPUs. Okay? We're using a very small subset of the magic tricks that came with these, so we're going to be fine. And we're doing this for phone and tablet, so make sure that's checked. That should be the default. Go ahead and hit next. I like to always start with an empty activity. Some of you, if you've used it before and you want to start with something else, that's fine. I like to build my own interfaces so I can do it my way rather than maybe the way that Android Studio wants to do it. That might be kind of I'm an older, stubborn programmer person thingy, but whatever. So pick an empty activity, not a basic activity. Basic activities make things actually life a little bit more difficult. Choose empty activity. Go ahead and hit next. Naming the original thing as main activity is fine. Generate a layout file for this guy. So we'll go ahead and hit finish. Just leave it all as the defaults. And it's going to build us a new project here. Well, we're going to be doing some stuff with assembly language, probably after maybe week 2 or 3. But we're doing practice with number conversion stuff, and I want to write programs for it, so we might as well do it in Android. Why not? You have an alternate suggestion? Yeah. Yeah, I guess more because it doesn't matter what kind of machines you have. So Android Studio runs on Mac, Linux, Windows, doesn't matter. If you're a .NET fan, but somebody else uses a Mac, they can't do it. If you're an iOS developer and somebody else has a PC, they can't do it. So this is kind of, if you're going to have an interface, this is kind of lowest common denominator that has some sort of, productivity value in real life. Having some experience working with Android is good on a resume. And have you done it before? Have you worked with Android? I mean, it'll be good to be able to say I have some experience with that. Okay, so in any case, we have these things called activities. So I'm going to kind of give you almost like a crash course in Android development here. Okay, just to kind of squeeze. How many of you in here have ever done anything with Android development? Okay, so Van has. How many of you have done something with Java? Done Java programming? Okay, so we're good there. So everybody in here is going to feel okay with the Java. The Android environment's really the new piece. Perfect. It's not a big deal. All right. So let me just quickly do this. As you're working on your homework, actually, you aren't necessarily aware of this. We use Slack. Here, have you used Slack before?
I watched your video from your other classes and it mentioned Slack.
Okay.
I've never used it.
Yeah, so at some point, go to cuwcs.slack.com. And create an account with your CUW account. So that'll let you into our Slack group, and you can get it on your phone, or you can download the app on there. And once you're in Slack, it looks like this. And there's a group in here, should be a group for 548. So go into 548 and turn on notification preferences for this, and make sure you have it set for, probably do all new messages for that. Don't necessarily turn on notifications for everything, but just for this channel. That way, if I put anything out there, you get a push notification letting you know. This is a good place to ask for help, that kind of stuff.
Do you have to create a new workspace, or is this my stuff is already entered in on there? Like, do I just enter my email and password that I have?
Yeah, then you'll join this workspace. So, like for instance, I'm in multiple Slack groups.
So I'm going to sign into like computer science.
Yeah, you have
just as long as you have a cuw.edu email, you're fine. Yeah, just create an account with your WIU email or CUW email, and it'll work. Okay. So in any case, Slack would be a good place to ask questions and things like that. I encourage you to work together, certainly on the first several homework assignments, because you're going to be learning Android together. I'm around all the time, so if you have questions, I've done quite a bit with Android. Van's done some stuff with Android. And most of the juniors and seniors in the undergrad program have done quite a bit with Android because they've been in some of my other classes. So if you're working in the lab or something here and you just see somebody who looks like they're in computer science and has a couple of years on them and you need help with something, they can probably help you. Okay? And once you get over the initial learning curve, it's not that difficult. It's just weird because you haven't used it before. Okay, so we have this thing called an activity. So this guy right here is called an app compat activity, whatever. But you think about in Android, every screen of your application is represented as an activity. Okay, every screen of our application is represented as an activity. And the default version of our empty application gives you exactly one activity. And when we start this, if you go ahead and hit play on here, if you don't have any virtual devices in here, you can create a new one. So when you create a new virtual device, I pick a phone, and I like to use like the Pixel. I think the Pixel is kind of a good common denominator one. So pick phone, pick Pixel, hit next or whatever. Once you get in here, it's going to ask you for which version of the API. Notice the default here for Pixel is Marshmallow. It's fine. It's already downloaded on this machine. So if Nothing shows up here that is already on the machine. Just click download next to one of these. It's fine. Notice that all of these are newer than the API we chose. We chose 15 or something. So just make sure you're able to select one of these guys. All right. And then once you do that, hit next. What does next take you to? It lets you choose the name. Don't change any of this other stuff. Just go ahead and hit finish. Okay. And what that's doing is it's creating a fake device, a device for your emulator. Okay. So notice I'd already done that here. So there's my Pixel API 23. So when you first hit play, when you open up Android Studio and you want to test the app, if you haven't already launched your emulator, it'll open up this screen. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll select Pixel API 23. I'll hit OK. An Android device. So notice it says performing clean boot, snapshot doesn't exist because it wasn't already running, that kind of stuff. So just hit dismiss there, and there's my fake Android device booting up. Make sense? And if you've never used Android before, you can actually play around with the Android operating system on here. It's a real phone, real working phone. All right, so notice it says Hello World. That's your stock Android application when you first launch it. So you probably want to do this when you first launch Android Studio and for the very first time, just to make sure everything's working. All right, I didn't write any code yet. It says Hello World. All right, once that's working, you kind of know that, okay, now I can test my application. So now what we want to have is we want to do a number conversion thing where we're going to put in a value in decimal and then be able to convert that number into other bases. Okay? We're going to add to this next time, but just because we're starting to practice with Android here, that's the only feature we're going to have. So for example, if I just go back to our slides here, and we talked about I want to talk about number conversion stuff. Let's go here. Well, actually, let me think about this. Instead of bases, why don't we do sizes? Okay, because that's what we've been talking about up to this point, so I don't have to introduce something new. We'll talk about the bases next time. So what we want to have, so we'll just say Android app. We want to have enter a size in let's say enter a size in bits. I want bits. Let's enter a size in megabytes. I think that'll be easier for us to test. Otherwise, you have to put in this giant number in bits. So you enter a size in megabytes. We'll have a little text box. So if you type in 5 for 5 megabytes, then you hit the button. Maybe we'll have a button too. So you'll have a click convert button. Converts the number of megabytes to bits, kilobits, megabits, gigabits, terabits, bytes, kilobytes, megabytes, which doesn't require any conversion, right? Gigabytes and terabytes. So convert to all those different things to show you the equivalent. So a lot of redundancy to what we talked about today, but just kind of getting you some practice with the interface, right? Okay, so if you put in 5 megabytes, for example, it should give you, for bits, it's going to be 5 times 8, that's 40 megabits, times 1024, that's kilobits, times 1024, which is bits. So 41,943,040 bits. Make sense? So you'll do the math for all that, so that way you can always just type in the number of megabytes, click convert, and it'll update all the other things for that stuff. Make sense? Okay. So now let's show you how to read in from like text fields and click a button and have it do something and that kind of stuff. So you kind of have the primitives you're going to need to do that. All right. So back here in Android Studio, over here on the left under App, and if you don't see it there, sometimes it's hidden like that. If you click on Project, it'll expand that menu. So in here, you'll see under App, you have Manifest, you have Java, then you have something called Resources. So Resources is something you will use, as well as what's under Java. So under Java, the very top thing is your actual application. These other ones are unit testing stuff. So you're going to have this thing in here called main activity. If you double click on that, it opens up this Java file. All right, so this is the code behind our first screen. And then under resources in layout, you have this thing called activity main. And this is the XML document that allows you to design your screen. But right now, we're just going to have a single screen in your application, so we don't have to explain too much extra stuff here. Okay? So our initial screen looks like this. And just to throw a little extra thing out here, and we talked about this last semester in the programming class, but remind me, what is MVC? Everybody in here has heard of MVC before, right? At least seen those letters next to each other. Yeah, we're going to run into a whole bunch of stuff in computer science where you recognize an acronym and have no idea what it is, right? But we talked about it last semester, right? MVC is a design pattern, right? And what are design patterns? Design patterns are proposed good solutions to common problems, whatever good and whatever common means. MVC specifically stands for Model View Controller. Okay. Now, what the heck does that mean? Model View Controller says it's a good idea to separate your logic from your design from your data. But for us, we're really thinking about logic from the design. Okay? This is Android's implementation of MVC. Our logic is here in the Java file. Our design is here in the XML file. Notice our design is showing this screen that has Hello World smack dab in the middle of it. And when I ran that guy, what did I get? I got a screen that had Hello World smack dab in the middle of it. Okay. Now, I'm actually going to change a little something here because I actually hate the constraint layout. And the reason I hate it is because I don't know how to use it. I promise you I could figure out how to use it, but we're not writing production release Android applications, so why don't we keep it easy, right? All right. So the very first thing I want to do, so notice we have a drag and drop stuff we can mess with here, and so notice with the constraint stuff, you can kind of move things around and it'll put it wherever it wants, and it kind of yo-yos it from different corners of the screen. That's how iOS programming works when you're designing the interface. I haven't had as much luck with it on here, which is why I really haven't spent time to mess with it. So what I'm going to do right off the bat is I'm just going to delete that text view. So you can do drag and drop stuff out here, or you can look at your component tree over here. Or if you're really adventurous, you can go and look at the XML directly. And sometimes you'll actually have to go to the XML if you just can't quite get something to drop in the right place. But generally speaking, this has improved to the point where you usually can just work with it. So what I'm going to do right off the bat is inside my constraint layout, I'm going to go to layouts up here. And our go-to move for a lot of the stuff we're going to do is these two different linear layouts. So I'm going to drop a vertical linear layout in there. All right, so inside my constraint layout, what's that guy? Oh, it's just I don't have anything in it yet. All right, so the way a vertical linear layout works, it's a container, and whenever I throw something inside of it, it lines it up vertically, just putting things on top of other things. All right, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to go ahead. So right here, here's my vertical linear layout. So notice it's kind of taking up the whole screen there. And over here, here's my attributes for this guy. And the width of it matches the parent, and the height of it matches the parent. So basically inside of this default constraint layout, I put a vertical linear layout that just fills the whole screen. Makes life easy. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take a, we're going to have some text. So I'm going to just have basically this is a label. Okay, so I'm going to do a plain text thing. Now when I drop, actually plain text is for inputting stuff. I'm going to do a text view. Text view is like a label. When I drop this inside of this vertical linear layout, where do you expect it to go? Top. Drop it in there. It's right there at the top. Okay, just so we see a different kind of widget. Here's a text box. If I drop this guy in, where's it going to go? If I drop it all the way down here at the bottom, where's it going to go? Right underneath that guy. See how linear layouts work? Keep throwing crap in there, it just organizes them for you. Life is easy. All right. Now, one kind of nice thing with Android that sometimes does make life a little bit easier, if I do my linear layout, each of these is kind of a container. All right. And I'm not going to go into too much detail with this because you have these differences between things like views and view groups. It's not going to be applicable to this first assignment, so I'm not going to talk about it right now. I'll introduce it when you need it, but let's get through our kind of intro to our Android environment here. So anything that's a container, that means anything that has other things in it, has a property associated with it called gravity. So, which is kind of cool because you can have different gravities for different containers. So right now, the gravity, so if I click on my linear layout here, and notice here it's showing me kind of like this default, my orientation by default is vertical. If I change it to horizontal, those things will line up differently. If I change it back to vertical, they'll reline up. Now, oh, interesting. Gravity was not out here previously. You had to go and dig for it. So if you click on gravity here, and I go ahead and I click on center, notice everything's squeezed to the center. Okay. If I unclick center and I go ahead and click on bottom, everything squeezes to the bottom. So gravity affects everything that is inside of that container that I'm setting the gravitational field for. Make sense? So kind of an interesting way of approaching it. It's not going to have an impact probably for your app, but just kind of a thing to point out. The default is top. So those two will look the same. Make sense? All right, so I've thrown a couple of things in here, but for right now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to remove that text box just because I want to show one thing at a time. All right, so there's my text view that's in there. Now so I'm going to click on that text view. Notice here's its attributes. I'm going to rename this guy. I'm going to rename this guy to just as a starting point, let's call this guy Bits TV. So maybe this ends up being the text view where you output your number of bits, just so you can reuse it moving forward. So we'll call that guy's Bits TV. TV for text view. Okay. Now, what if I want that text to be centered? What will I do? Yeah, so there is an alignment thing here, but let's assume you didn't know anything about that. Based on what I've taught you so far, you can set the gravity of that guy to be center. Make sense? But for text views, like you said, there is an alignment. You could treat it just like text. But if you set the gravity for that guy, it is interesting. Gravity did not show up out here, so you have to go to the view all attributes, which shows this big scary list of stuff. Go here, go to center, click it, and now it's centered. See that? So, pick your poison, I guess, but and then there's view fewer attributes to go back to this guy. All right. So in any case, I'll go ahead and center just because it maybe looks a little bit better. And if you want to make it a little bit bigger as well, so we'll make the text size of this guy. Maybe we'll make it 24. Read it a little bit better on the screen. At least I can. And then what we'll do is the text, I'm going to go ahead and take text view out of that so it's empty. But then we have something called a hint. Oh, so shouldn't this guy be called hint? Used to be called hint. Oh, whatever. Oh, whatever. Oh, actually, it wouldn't be a hint here. Hint would be the input text fields. So this wouldn't have a hint anyways. So right now, we'll just have it say text view, like I said before. All right, so that's the default value. We name this guy bits TV. Now, what we want to be able to do is programmatically, we want to change what's on this label. Okay? Now, if I do nothing else right now, I've just updated my interface. It no longer says hello world. Now it has a vertical linear layout with a text view in there that says text view. So if I hit play, it's going to relaunch this app, and it's going to show me my new layout that just says text view. So there's my new view that says text view. Thrilling, right? All right. But now it would be nice for us to have programmatic control over what's on this label or what's on this text view. iPhone calls them UI labels. All right. Now notice when I click on this guy, remember I've named him Bits TV. Android's implementation of MVC, I mean, again, MVC says it's a good idea to keep your logic in one place and your interface in another place. Well, here's my interface here. My logic is over inside of this activity Java file, right? But what if I want to start having an impact on my interface? I need to somehow get access to that label out there. Okay, so I happen to remember that this guy is called Bits TV, and I know that he is of type text view. This is, where's this type here? He was a, does it show me what his type is out here? I assumed it would show me his type there. And if you can't see it out here, you can go to text, and then you go down here where your text view is, and notice here he is. That's my text view. All right, but we remembered when we put it out there, it was a text view, so I know that's the kind of animal I'm dealing with. So I know that somewhere in my interface, I have a text view named Bits TV. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my activity here. Now, notice we have this little magical thing here called R. Okay, this is kind of the glue that holds MVC together for Android. So the Android environment maintains a class called r.java that stores in it all the crap that's in your layouts under friendly names, because it's going to give them each a unique identifier or something like that, some crazy number that you're not going to remember. But we remember that we have a dude called Bits TV, just like we have a dude called Activity Main that was created for us when we created our first activity. Okay, so the very first thing that's happening inside of this activity, we have this thing called onCreate. So activity screens in your application have a life cycle. So there's several different things that happen, several different points in time, like when an activity first is born, it's being created. So onCreate, when it's first being born, what things do you want to do? When it first shows up on the screen, what do you want to do? When it leaves the screen, what do you want to do? When it comes back to the screen after previously being on the screen, what do you want to do? You have kind of some different points in time that you can interject information into your app. For us, all we're going to worry about is onCreate here. So this is kind of like initial setup. This means the onCreate for an activity means the activity exists. It probably hasn't shown up on the screen yet, but that's imminent. So any sort of changes you want to make, do that now. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to say, let's go ahead and let's just change that text to say woot. All right, pick your poison. So I need to give myself programmatic access to that text view. So I'm going to create a variable of type text view, and we'll call this guy Bits TV, and since that seems to match the name I called it out there. And this guy is going to equal, now I'm going to show you the wrong way to do this first. Okay, it's almost the right way, but I'll be able to explain why it's not quite right. Now when I say this dot, this is an activity. Okay, so I'm asking this activity who has his content view, so right up here, there's something a little hidden right here. There's a this dot set content view. That's what's actually in front of that set content view. So this says activity set your content view to activity main, which is the dude we were messing with out here. This is activity main. Okay? So we're basically associating this activity with that layout. So we're gluing those together. We designed them separate, but now we're gluing them together, and that's why this particular activity shows the interface that we built right here. Make sense? But now I'm going to say, I need your help to locate this text view that I happen to name bits TV. So I'm going to say this dot find view by ID. Now I mentioned, now this guy's taking an integer as a parameter. So there's some funky number, random number that was generated that's associated with bits TV that I haven't looked up, I don't have memorized, whatever. So I'm going to use R. I'm going to say R dot layout dot. Actually, it's R dot. Sorry, not layout. R dot ID dot bits TV. And notice here it shows you what the value of that guy happens to be. Crazy value that we're not going to memorize.
So if you need to put in a number, you can do the r.id or r.whatever.
Yeah, but you would never put in a number. You would always do it this way. Yeah, this is just proving that it puts some crazy number behind the scenes to uniquely identify your text view. We're people, we like to call it bits TV. So we'll just say bits TV, and we're going to rely on r.id to remember what that value was. All right, so I'm saying give me access to that guy. Now, as it is, we're going to have an issue here because find view by ID, let me just show you again real quick. This dot find view by ID. Notice that, can I show it on here? I wanted to show more of the, well, the return type for this guy is something called a view, which is it's a generic type. So everything that we see on the screen is a view. This actually happens to be a very special kind of view. It happens to be a text view. And text views have an attribute associated with it called text. So even though everything we see is a view, I happen to know that bits TV is a text view. All right? And I really want to be able to set as text here in a minute. And it just so happens that when I use my activity, so this dot, this is the activity, this instance of the activity, and I say I want you to find a view by ID, he's going to go and find a view associated with that ID, but give it back to me as a generic view, even though I know it's actually a text view. All right, so I have to typecast it to a text view here. We know that's what it is. We're just saying, hey, after you find me that view, trust me, he's a text view, and I'm going to throw him in a variable capable of holding a text view. From that point forward, now I can use him as a text view, which is what he is.
Would it normally be a number? Would it return as a number?
Well, it always returns this guy right here. Well, here, this function call right here returns a view object,
Okay.
a pointer to a view. Its address will always be some number. That's the unique view we're searching for. We just happen to know that this particular view isn't just a generic view. He's a text view. That's the kind of animal he is. But we have this generic tool that allows us to kind of search through the chest and just looking for all the views that are in there. And I got one. Here's the one with the ID you asked for. And he doesn't really know much about what this guy was, just that the ID matches. We happen to know what he actually was. Okay, so we'll say he's a text view, and now I have him as a text view, so I could say bits TV dot set text to woot. All right, so I'm programmatically giving myself access to that text view. Then I'm using that to change the text on there. Now this is happening on create, so this is before it showed up on the screen. So when this app first launches, it'll already say woot. It'll no longer say text view, even though we designed it out here to show text view. Make sense? Because this is all happening on the creation of this activity before it's ever showing up on the screen. I'll go ahead and hit play here. Let's see if the new version pops up my simulator for me. No. Oh, it should do that, shouldn't it? So you have to switch back to your simulator. But anyways, there's your Woot. All right, so that guy's on there. Now, what might be nice, especially since for our homework we're going to be having to click a button to do something, maybe we have a button that actually changes it to Woot. That way we can see how buttons might work, right? So I'll go ahead and I'm going to throw a button out here. We'll just go ahead and toss it in our vertical linear layout so it'll show up right underneath this guy. So is it under widgets? Where are my buttons? Button. So under widgets, I just throw my button out there. All right, and this guy will say, click me. All right, it's my click me button. So we want to have it when we click this button, this text changes from text view to Woot. Make sense? Okay, so we're going to need to make a function that button calls. All right. So back here in main activity, I'm going to create a public function here. Public void, let's call this guy click me button pressed. You can name it whatever you want, but that sort of kind of makes sense. This is what I want to happen when the click me button was pressed. The important part here is this guy has to take a view as a parameter. Okay, and notice it went ahead and it imported view for me. It's importing these individual things for me. Yeah, it's Option Enter on a Mac, and I think it's Alt Enter on a PC to have it auto do the import. Note if you saw for a second, it was red at the very beginning, and then when I hit, I think you can click on it and it'll auto import it, or you can hit Alt Enter and it'll just do it. But after you, after you mess with it for a second, you'll see how it does it. But it'll try to do it on its own. It'll yell at you in red until it fixes.
What's the V for?
That's just the name of the variable. This is the input. So this function takes a single variable as an input. You can name this elephant if you want, but he must be of type view. And what that guy is, what V is, it'll be what widget called me. Because you can have a single function like this be the on-click for all sorts of different buttons or things that are on your screen. Okay, so you can have 10 different buttons that all call this exact same function, for example. So you might be interested in which particular view called me this time, because maybe that makes a difference. Make sense? All right. But for us right now, all that's important is this guy must take a view as a parameter. It's an important part of how MVC works. How do we make this function available to the on-click thing for a button out in our design? All right. So, and then what are we going to do in here? We're going to do the same crap we did up here. I'll just move it from onCreate. I'll throw it into here. So now it won't happen on onCreate. Instead, only when we click that button, well, we haven't hooked the button up yet, but presumably only when we click the button will it go ahead and look up my text view and then set its text to Woot. Make sense? All right, so I've made that change here in code. So this is my logic. Okay, now I need to go and update my interface so that he knows to go ahead and call this function when that button's clicked. So I'm going to go out here to activity main. I'll go ahead and click on the button. And sometimes if the thing doesn't show up in a second, like I'm going to show you, sometimes you might have to click away from it, then click back onto it. Because what we're going to do is on that button, we're going to go to this on-click feature right here. And there's a drop-down. Yeah, so right now there's nothing in that drop-down. Oh, there we go. So I had to click and then click away from it. And now notice that it's click me button pressed is there. It has found that function that I wrote on the other side. Okay, so that function had to be written in a very specific way. It needed to be public. It needed to be void, so it doesn't return a value. You can name it whatever you want. So I named it click me button pressed because that makes sense, right? But it must take a view as a parameter. You don't need to name that parameter V if you don't want to. You can name it elephant, but it has to be a view. Make sense? That's just the rules to make MVC work in Android. So I'll go ahead and select that function. So now what happens is when I click this button, so that button's on-click event will call my function. And what does that function do? That function grabs my bits text view and then sets the text to Woot. I'll go ahead and run this. So now it should show text view initially, right? So there's my text view, and then I do click me, and now it switches to Woot. Okay, release it on the App Store, charge $10 for this, good to go.
Ooh, standing hard.
All right. Now, a couple things you'd probably change here. Now, every single time I click this button, it's calling this function again, right? Well, maybe I want this guy to do something more logical, like count or something like that. So maybe what I do is up here, maybe I give myself as a global variable, I'll create a private.
Nice.
Ay, ay, ay. I just started programming last week, so this is pretty good for a week of programming, dude. All right, so Bits TV. All right, so we'll call that guy Bits TV, but I made it global, so it's available to this entire class. I'm going to go ahead and, because I don't need to go and relook that up every single time I click the button. So on create, I'll just go ahead and give myself access to that. All right, and I like to say this dot Bits TV, even though it's not required. This is actually technically faster. This is not asking you to resolve the variable. At some point, that'll come up when we start talking about how high-level languages turn into assembly language, but just trust me, it's faster. Plus, you'll have less typos because you say this dot, it'll do auto-completion for you. So now on the click me thing, I can just tell the guy to go ahead and set the thing. So I'll go ahead and run it again right now. You'll see it has the exact same output, just I'm not having to relook up the button or the text view every single time I click the button. I'll just run it real quick so you'll see it's the same. I know I'm going a little fast, but it's a little shorter in time. Click me, there's my Woot. Keep calling it over and over again. It's calling that function over time, and it's just putting Woot in there each time. So instead of saying Woot only, maybe I want to have some sort of counter. Okay, so maybe up here I go ahead and I say private int count, and we'll go ahead and say count starts off at 0. So we'll put in a Woot space, and we'll concatenate it with this dot count, and then we'll maybe always say this dot count plus plus. So it's always one higher than it used to be, proving that we're calling it multiple times. So we'll see a Woot 0, Woot 1, Woot 2, Woot 3, blah, 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 blah. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now let's go ahead and let's add an input text box. That way we can type something in, click a button, read what we typed in, put it out on the label. That's kind of the mechanic that we're going to need for our homework, right? Except we'll be putting it out into like 10 different labels for bits and kilobits and blah, 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 blah. All right, so we'll go back here. And I will go ahead, I'm just going to rearrange here a little bit. I'm going to put this text view below my button. Ruh-roh. Sometimes it's harder to do it up here. I'm going to put my text view below my button. over here, if you do it in the component tree, it's sometimes easier to move them around. All right, then I'm going to go ahead and put the input text above the button. So that's under text. It's called plain text is what I'm going to enter in. Actually, we're going to be entering in a number, right? So you can actually go ahead and choose the number text box. And what that'll do is it'll change the default keyboard to be only a keyboard with numbers in it. You can pick your poison. You can do that. You can choose plain text, then go and update which the keyboard is in the attributes. This is just a shortcut to doing it. All right, so I'll go ahead and use the number 1, and I'll put it above my button. Okay, and I'll go ahead and click on that guy. And we're going to go ahead and call this guy, what did I say was going to be megabytes, right? So MB input. Well, whatever. I don't. Huh? This is the name of that widget.
No, it's a number, right? But still it gives string, right? Not number.
It'll ultimately, under the hood, be a number. We will remember it as a string. Yeah. So I'm going to name it lowercase because it's a better naming convention for this. So I'm going to say MB input text. All right, so that's what the name of that guy is going to be, is MB input text. And here's that hint thing. So enter megabytes. All right, and then I'll go ahead and center that. So we're going to have you enter megabytes in there, and then when you hit the button, it's going to fill in all your other things, but right now we only have one thing, right? So, but I needed to name this guy because I'm going to need programmatic access to him so I can read in. When I hit the button, I need to be able to read in from that input text to get the value I typed in there. Now, let's just confirm he is an input text. Yeah, oh, he's an edit text, not an input text. He's an edit text. That's the kind of animal he is. So let me go back here. I'm going to name it again. I'm going to call it MBET. Megabyte edit text. All right, that'll be his string-based name, and it got mapped to some number that we're not in charge of behind the scenes. All right, so now we need to go ahead and give ourselves access to this guy so that when we click this button, we read in the value from here and output it to here. Make sense? That's kind of all the moving parts we need. So we'll go back into our code. I'll give myself access to that input text. So I'll say private edit text MBET. I'm just happening to name them the same as my variable name out there. You can name that guy whatever you want, but I'm going to name him MBET. And then down here, I'll go ahead and look them up. So I'll say this dot MBET is equal to the edit text version of this dot find view by ID r dot ID dot MBET. So now that'll look that guy up. So now I have access to that dude, right? Okay. So now when I hit my button, rather than setting it to woot, and I don't need count anymore, so I'll just dump count here. Yeah, here we'll do it. I'm going to do it in 2 steps anyways. So I'm going to go ahead and say this dot mbet dot get text dot toString, because it actually comes in as something called an editable. Don't worry about it. ToString makes it a string. All right, and we'll go ahead and we'll set our text view equal to whatever our edit text set on it. I'll go ahead and hit play here. All right, so if I just hit click me right now, what's going to happen? Empty string. It read in the nothingness I have here, right? Okay, if I change this to, there's 85. Notice it put up the keyboard there, but you can use a normal keyboard as well if you don't want to have to use that thing. So I'll say 85. I'll hit click me like that. There's my 85. Now, one little catch though here. If I change this to 32, I hit click me, now it's 32. So but the catch is this. I'm going to say +5. All right. Go ahead and run this guy again. And I'll put in 32. What's going to happen when I say click me? Of course, it'll say 325. It read it as a string, and it concatenated a 5 onto the end of the string. Make sense? For your homework, though, we're going to need numbers, right? Pretty easy in Java. I'll go ahead and give it to you just to keep your stress levels lower. So we'll go ahead and we'll say string, we'll just call it value, is equal to, we'll go ahead and grab this guy. Okay, that guy's a string. Okay, so actually let's call this S value just to keep it distinct so you kind of understand the individual steps. I would probably just do this in one step, but this is fine. So now we're going to say int I value is equal to integer.parseInt of S value. That'll squeeze the integer version of that guy out. Okay, converts it to an integer. Now, usually I wouldn't have given that to you, but since you're already going to be learning the Android stuff, I won't make you stress over something else. So now if I say I value here, now it'll actually numerically add 5 because I'm working with the number version of what was in that string, not the string itself. All right, so now if I say 32 and I say click me, now it'll say 37. Ruh-roh. Why is this wrong? Why did I get a crash? I'm setting the text to an int.
Yeah.
Needs to be a number. So I'm going to concatenate the empty string onto that value plus 5. Now it's a string, right? So do the math, turn it into a string. Would I kill it? Oh, sorry, it says connected. All right, so now I'll say 32. There's my 37. Make sense? All right, so kind of gives you a good enough starting point for that. So now let me just take a couple more minutes here just to show you how you're able to do your homework then. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check this into GitHub, okay, which is an online thing. If you've never used, how many of you have never used GitHub before? Okay, so everybody in here has used GitHub to some extent? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to VCS. I'm going to say import into version control. And I'll say share project on GitHub. Now, the first time you do this on yours, you'll probably have to provide it with your GitHub credentials. If you haven't created an account, you'll have to do that. I do this often, so it already has my credentials in here. So I'll just go ahead and click share. It's going to show me here's all your new crap since you've never put it up there. Hit OK. It's going to upload all that crap. Here's my project on GitHub. Okay, so I'll go ahead and copy it here because I'll give you that link. But what you're going to do when you first sign in is see, if I sign in as, yeah, see, if I sign in myself, I can't fork my own repository. In any case, what will end up happening here, so I signed in as myself, and I own this one, so it's not going to let me fork it. But what you'll have up here somewhere is a button that says fork, okay, which makes a copy of this repository and puts it as if it's one of your local repositories. That make sense? Because you don't want to check out mine. You can check mine out and run it, no problem. But if you then make changes and want to submit those changes, you don't have the permissions to change my repository. So what you do is you fork it to make a copy of my current repository in your account. Then you check it out from your account. Okay? And you can check it out either directly from Android Studio, which is probably what I would do. I would probably come in here and go to, here, let me just close this. I would say check out project from version control when you first open it. And I'm going to choose GitHub here. And then I would paste in, see, if I were checking out of mine, because I've already forked it to my repository, I would paste in the location of that repository and tell it where I'm going to check it out to and what the directory name is. So I would go ahead and hit clone then, and it would download it. For you, what you'll do is you'll click the fork on the link I give you. Then that'll show it in your repository. Then you get the URL for your version of that repository. That's what you paste in here. And you check that out. That make sense? Then you can make all your changes. So after you've made your changes, I'll just kind of show you what that last step would be. So let's say I come in here and I say, made a change. Added a little comment or something like that. I'm done working. My homework is complete. Because I checked it out from a repository I own, like you'll check it out of a repository you own, you can go to the VCS. You can say commit changes. It'll show me that one file has changed. Here's the thing that's changed, blah, 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 whatever. Don't worry about it. I can do a little message here. So I'll say made a change. Then under commit, you do commit and push. And then it's saying, you know, some code analysis stuff couldn't have been done, blah, blah, blah. Just say whatever. Just commit. And then it's going to make you say push again, even though I already said commit and push. So then just do push. 2 files were committed. If I come back in here and refresh this, notice it shows now the made a change thing. So that's how you will, after you've checked mine out, made changes for your homework, and pushed it back to your GitHub, what you'll end up submitting to me is this link, along with something you've dealt with me before. I have something called a self-evaluation, which I'll put up on Blackboard. It's like a little 3-question thing. I want to know how long you spent on this. Based on your effort, what do you think you deserve? Based on your solution, what do you think you deserve? And then I want you to tell me about what things you had trouble with. That helps me, especially with programming, because sometimes you might spend 10 hours on something and have very little to show for it. So I want to know about your experience so I can give you partial credit based on that. That makes some sense? Otherwise, if you spent 10 hours and basically turn in garbage, I'm going to assume you didn't put any effort in when you might have put crazy effort in and just cried yourself to sleep. Okay? So what you'll submit to me is the self-evaluation as well as a link to your GitHub repository. All right? I do encourage you maybe to work together as a group on the homework assignments. I don't care. I'll find out on your exams if you're not learning this stuff. Okay? I'm not going to sit here looking for cheaters and things like that. This is a collaborative learning environment type thing. So make a study group, decide when you guys are going to get together and work on it, help each other learn Android Studio, whatever. Like I said, I've only been using it for a week, so I'm going to be a little help, but if you have questions, you can ask me. All right. Questions, comments, concerns, bribes.
You need validations also for all the assignments.
What do you mean validations?
Invalidation systems.
For inputs? No, just make it work. Yeah, you could assume that they're going to put in a...
I'm asking, you're trying to break the application.
No. I want to know that you're basically practicing some Android stuff and showing me you can convert between the sizes. You know, I'm not going to give it like -27 and say, oh, this didn't work. No. Don't spend your time error checking. Get it working at some basic level. Make sense? Yeah, I'm not looking for reasons to take points away from you. You know, I want us to learn stuff in here and have fun, but so spend your time. If you want to do something interesting, do that. Don't spend your time validating forms and crap. You know, professionally, you should do that. But for your assignments, don't worry about that. Okay. So I'll go ahead and upload this last video, put your homework up. It's due before class starts next week. Same time, same station. Like I said, I'm around all the time if you want to hit me on Slack or send me a text message. Here, I'll put my phone number up here real quick just so it's on the recording too. Best way to reach me is either Slack, email, or text. Phone is probably the worst way to meet me, to reach me. Popping into my office, sometimes you'll find me there, sometimes you won't, but I'm always happy to schedule an appointment with you. So we'll just figure out a time that's good for both of us, and I'm happy to come in or whatever. All right? But feel free to text me whenever you want. If you don't get a reply from me, like let's call it during waking hours within like an hour, send it again. I'm usually pretty quick at replying. So if I don't reply pretty quickly, that probably means that it fell off my radar. So don't worry about annoying me. Send it again, and I'll get back with you. Sound good? All right. I'll see everybody next week.
Start saying